All right, well, good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the second Christianity Atheist debate that we've had. And it is sponsored by two groups. One is the Christian Century Toastmasters Club, which I'm a part of, and also the Backyard Skeptics, which Bruce just introduced you to. And so I'm going to be the moderator tonight. Now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our club, the Christian Toastmasters Century Club. We're a fairly new club. I'm the Vice President of Public Relations for the club. And I'd like to tell you what our mission is, so you have an idea of what we're all about. So let me read this for you. The mission of the Christian Century Toastmasters Club is to provide a mutually supportive and positive learning environment in which every member has the opportunity to develop communication and leadership skills, with an emphasis in the area of Christian apologetics, which in turn fosters self-confidence and personal growth. So for those of you who maybe don't quite sure what apologetics means, it basically means defending one's beliefs. And so that's an orientation that we have in our club. Now I'd like to start by introducing the participants. So first of all, representing the Christian perspective is David Layman. And David has his doctorates in society and religion from Oxford Graduate School in Tennessee, and in biblical studies from Louisiana Baptist University, Shreveport, Louisiana. And he is a prior professor at Purdue University. Also representing the Christian perspective, we have David Penrose, and he has BAs in religion and psychology from Mid-American Nazarene University and an MA in cross-cultural counseling psychology from Michigan State University. And he's been working on a book, and the name of the book is A Genius Within, Secrets of Acquiring Vast Knowledge. I understand he just completed it. He also works as a behavioral and forensic psychologist. Now, representing the atheist perspective, first of all, we have Kent Martin over here on the right. And Kent is a systems engineer by day and a dreamer, writer, and musician by night. His great passions are the pursuit of knowledge and personal growth under the aegis of the scientific method. And finally, representing the atheist perspective, we have Clarke. And Chris is a skeptic and an atheist who enjoys studying the sciences and debating different ideas. He earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from the University of California at Los Angeles in 2003, and a Master of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from the University of Southern California in 2010. So now we have an idea of who our speakers will be, and I'd like to provide some ground rules for the debate. Now, the central question that they will be addressing is, does God exist? And we will have opening statement by David Layman, and then counter statements by Kent Martin and Clarke. Then we will have opening statements by Kent and Chris, with counter statements by David Layman and David Penrose. We'll have a 10-minute break at that point, and then we'll have questions from the audience. So we'll have a lot of time that you can give your questions to the individuals here. And each question will be timed, and this is similar to what we do in Toastmasters. We time our talks so that we can be as efficient as possible. So Deborah Reisdorf is going to be responsible for timing us, and she is our Vice President of Membership, by the way, in our club. And Deborah, could you explain how you'll be doing the timing?
Thank you. The timing will be fairly simple. I will turn the green light on when you're 2 minutes from being finished, the yellow light on when you're 1 minute from being finished, and the red light when your time is expired, and you'll have 30 seconds to complete it after that.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. So we're now going to begin with opening statements. And we're going to start with David Layman. And David, would you please share from a Christian perspective why you believe God exists?
You're going to be sitting down, or
do you want me to stand up, or do you want me to sit down?
You're fine.
Probably can be better target standing up. Well, I appreciate Bruce and the Atheist Backyard Skeptics for co-hosting this. It's been a lot of fun working with these guys. I believe that God has given us testimonies, internal testimonies, the light that lighteth every man that comes into the world. He's given us external testimonies. His invisible power and attributes are clearly seen by the things that are made, so that they're without excuse. The firmament declares his handiwork. God has created us so complex that we have no way of understanding how this could be. We are superhuman in the sense that there are certain things like machines that are not superhuman. We can build them with time and effort and energy. We can create a lot of things that work. But man has not been able to create life. That's something that only God, I believe, can do. And the more complex we study these things, in fact, we go into a whole subject where we actually learn things by studying the miniature, and we can understand the whole by understanding its component parts. We do this in biochemistry, we do this in, we get to the DNA molecule, we can find a lot of things out, but we can never understand how it got there in the first place. So just understanding how it functions does not necessarily tell us how it got there. And that's what the Bible says. It says, you know, that that's why we're fearfully and wonderfully made in such a way that it's something that's not going to happen naturally. Now, there was a lot of people that tried to understand how these things got here. In fact, there's two questions that everybody asks. Where did we come from and where are we going? And that's kind of what we'd like to know. Every one of us would like to know that, I believe. And so it kind of depends on what we're doing here at this time, the answers to those kinds of questions. Well, there was a guy named Austin Clarke. Now, he was one of the leading researchers at the Smithsonian Institute, spent years studying life, and he decided, finally, he wrote a book in 1930 called The New Evolution, Zoogenesis. He says if you're going to believe in evolution, the only way it's going to happen is from the ground up, from dirt and water. Because all of the organs are in the body. How are you going to change that organ into another organ? How are you going to permeate? There is no such thing, according to him, as trans-species evolution. Can't go from one kind to another kind. And it was that same year, in 1930, that Dr. Richard Goldsmith, who had been working for 25 years at Berkeley, trying to find some way to get the fruit fly, which was the smallest particle that you could actually observe any mutational change, 25 years bombarding these things with chemicals, with radiation, and he'd get a deformed fruit fly. He'd get six wings or 4 wings, but he'd only get a deformed fruit fly. He wouldn't get a house fly or a horse fly or an elephant or anything else out of this. And so he gave up too, and he wrote a book called The Material Basis of Evolution, which he showed point after point the error of evolutionary theory, particularly the uniformitarian model. He literally tore it to pieces. No evolutionist could answer. Likewise, he was a confirmed evolutionary atheist. But he realized this wasn't going to happen gradually, and that's what Darwin said. If you can show that this couldn't happen in minute steps, my theory would totally break down. Well, that's what's happened. Most of the uniformitarians, over 50%, have gone to a progressive, to what we call punctuated equilibrium. In other words, the same thing that Dr. Stephen Jay Gould, Stephen Stanley, Niles Eldredge, several others have gone because there's no transitional forms. As Colin Patterson, who was head of the British Museum, had the largest fossil collection in the world, wrote a book called Evolution, and Dr. Luther Sutherland had a chance to read the book. He said, I noticed you didn't include any transitional forms in your book on fossils. Now, Carl Dunbar said that fossils provide the only evidence that evolution has occurred on this planet. And yet, what he found, he didn't say he couldn't find any transitional forms. He said, I couldn't even tell an artist how to draw one because I don't know what one would look like. And he started asking the leading evolutionists, what about evolution? Is there anything we know that is actually true? And none of the evolutionists, these are the ones writing the books on the subject, could come up with anything about evolution they knew to be true. It's kind of like the elephant in the living room. And I use this illustration because a lot of the scientists understand this. And this conversation was actually writer George Kaler interviewed Sam, a molecular biologist, and George asked Sam about his work, and Sam, you know, they said we're like detectives. We're like trying to unravel the human genome. He says it's like reading a book, an Encyclopedia Britannica. He said, well, you know, I'm trying to figure out what the words are. He says, well, just use spell check. He said, we don't even know what language we're dealing with. We don't know what the punctuation is, but somehow we're able to find out some of these things. And yet, he said, did this all happen by chance? He said, Sam, nobody in my field believes it happened by chance. Nobody believes it happened by evolution. He said, well, have you given any lectures on the subject? Have you written any books on this stuff? He said, no. He said, it all happened by chance. Wait a minute, you told me it couldn't happen by chance. He said, in order to be a molecular biologist, you have to hold on to two insanities at the same time. One, it would be insane to say that you believe that it happened by chance, that it happened by evolution, because we know the facts. Two, it would be insane to say that it didn't, because all government work would stop, all grants would stop, I'd be out of a job or relegated to some part of my field that I couldn't earn a decent living. And that's the same thing that Dr. Jerry Bergman noticed. He wrote a book called The Criterion. And after he wrote that book, after he had lost his job, here's a guy with 4 earned doctorates and 9 master's degrees, a guy that is an excellent teacher, but because they suspected that he might not teach evolution with enough gusto, since he was head of the International Creation Conference, that probably was one of their first clues, that he was let go, and so he now teaches Darwinian full on, because to call Darwin a sexist was an understatement. He believed that women were less highly evolved than men, and he's teaching to about a 90% women audience in a nurses' college there in Ohio, and they're fully annoyed by it, but he said, well, that's what he has to do. He has to teach evolution because that's what's required. This happened way back in England with the X Club. At the time, in order to get a scientific article published, it had to be approved by this X Club, which was chaired by a guy named Thomas Huxley, which Darwin bulldogged. And so in order to get something published, it had to agree with evolution even back then. So we see that there are political things going on. And so you see this in the schools and the libraries and the media, but the scientists themselves, they know better. But they're kind of, they're not able to really share a lot of this material that they know to be true. I was talking about reductionism a minute ago. Usually, we discover how things work by observing the component parts. We use the light microscope. We reveal the relationship between the chromosomes and cellular division, and the electron microscopy allows visualization of genes and even DNA molecules within the chromosomes. Chemical analysis and X-ray diffraction studies have revealed the specific structure of DNA base pairing and the roles of DNA, RNA, mRNA, tRNA, and various enzymes in genetics and heredity. However, reductionism is only useful for explaining the operation of the machine. It's not useful for explaining the origin of the machine. And then we have biochemical bias. Yes, there are certain molecules that like to pull together. And so not everything is actually random. However, there's no evidence for the bias producing codes or information. Pre-biological natural selection is a contradiction of terms. In other words, in order for the animal to process through neo-Darwinianism, it has to have some kind of selection, and it will select things based upon the ability to reproduce. The fact that it can reproduce will keep the line stronger the next generation, but if you're talking about things that are not even alive yet, that don't have any reproduction capacity, you can't apply that to molecules. In other words, in order to get a biogenesis or life in some way, you have to have some kind of machine that would allow it to happen, yet the machine is what you're trying to accomplish. It's what we call a teleonomic system, where it takes food in an animal using the sun's energy and converts that through the process of metabolism and the genetic code to grow the particular animal or human. And you've got plants that have photosynthesis. It's a process, but it's a teleonomic system. It takes the light energy from the sun, and it uses the process of photosynthesis and the genetic code that's already built in to grow. So it's going against the second law of thermodynamics in that case, but you have to have a machine in order to do that. If you're trying to discover how the machine got there in the first place, that's a question that the evolutionist has not actually been able to address. And then we look at the complexity itself. The origin and modification of DNA. First, proteins depend on DNA for their formation, but DNA cannot form and therefore exist without pre-existing without existing proteins. And sufficient protein 124 to house and catalyze the DNA independently evolved, and if they did, and subsequently associated together to form the first living entity, the individual probabilities must be multiplied. The total probability would be 1 over 10 to the 89,190th power. That's the probability of forming DNA times 1 over 10 to the 78,436th power, the probability of forming 124 proteins, which is 1 over 10 to the 187,626 power, assuming that there are a million Earths around every star in the universe, and each having its oceans full of nucleotides linking together to form DNAs every second for 10 billion years. And to show how improbable this is, you can only cram 10 to the 130th power electrons in the known universe. But second, if despite the virtual impossible odds, proteins arose by chance, there's not the remotest reason to believe they could form a membrane-encased, self-reproducing, self-replicating living cell. That's a jump in complexity that nobody's been able to come up with, and that's what caused Michael Behe to jump ship and write Darwin's Black Box. Third, living cells contain thousands of different chemicals, some acidic, some basic, so you'd have to have buffers and barriers, otherwise the things would dissolve within themselves. And then you have to have chemical pathways, each one involving a series of complex steps. For example, the clotting of blood requires 20 to 30 steps, and each one has to be performed in a specific order or the animal dies. Rat poison just simply interrupts one of those steps in the blood clotting process. So DNA contains information to make the brain and all the organs in the body. A genome is the entire genetic information for that particular species. And you've got the different DNA size of the genome varies within the different animals. It's interesting that Mycoplasma genitalium has 580,073 base pairs. Fly has 122 million bases. Humans 3.3 billion. Whisked ferns 250 billion bases, and a frog has 1 trillion. As I said before, Lee Spencer said that when frogs start classifying themselves, they can put themselves on the top of the list. So we look at the complexity of life itself, and every part of our body is so tremendously complex, and there is such a thing we call irreducible complexity. Something, in order to work, has to function so that it actually has to reach what we call centropy, to be so functional in order to help the animal survive. So we look at things like the eye and the ear and the skin and various other organs of the body and wonder how that happened naturally. How could it gradually happen and eventually get to the place where the animal is able to function? For example, in the eye, the human brain contains over 12 billion cells forming 120 trillion interconnections. And the light-sensitive retina of the eye, which is really part of the brain, contains over 10 million photoreceptor cells. Each photoreceptor cell can perform the equivalent of 500 nonlinear simultaneous differential equations 100 times a millisecond. And when you consider that there's 10 million of them interacting with each other in complex ways, it would take a Cray supercomputer over 100 years to simulate what takes place in the back of your eye many times every second. The ear has the ability to hear the 1/30,000th of an inch of atmospheric pressure. So if I stand on a piece of paper and I'm standing in the same position, your ear is sensitive to the difference in atmospheric pressure. That is what a pulse of sound is. It's refractions and contractions of actual air molecules bouncing up against each other, hitting against your ear. The ear has a damper mechanism capable of dampening 1,000,000 to 1. So you can hear a rock band or you can listen to a pin drop, and yet somehow the ear is able to adjust to all those things. Whoever invented the ear must have at least known about hearing to create an instrument so precisely designed for that purpose alone. And then you come up to sexual reproduction, for example. The millions of complex products of the male reproductive system, pollen and sperm, must have had an affinity for, mechanical or chemical electrical compatibility with the eggs of the female reproductive system. The many intricate processes occurring at the molecular level inside a fertilized egg would have to work at fantastic precision, process scientists can describe only in a general sense, and this string of accidents must have occurred for millions of different species. We have literally thousands of symbiotic relationships. We talk about, for example, a fruit fly or just a housefly. A housefly itself, if you let it multiply by itself without any spiders around or anything else to people to swat it, then it would cover the earth to a level of about 50 feet in 6 months. So as I talk to some people who actually believe in sort of a progressive evolution, progressive creationism, I say the whole biosystem or ecosystem pretty much has to be there all at once. Because of the literally thousands of symbiotic relationships, animals that require each other. They need some other animal to hunt, to eat. They need plants. Plants have to produce the oxygen that the animals use. I mean, the entire ecosystem pretty much has to be there all together at once. And so the only explanation to that is creation. And then we look at the living technology, the technology that is so tremendously complex that man tries to figure out things. A lot of times he understands this simply by watching things, looking at animals, and then trying to design some kind of machine that can duplicate what that animal is doing. The immune system had to be there right from the start. And in order for that to work, you had to, each immune system can recognize invading bacteria, viruses, and toxins. Each system can quickly mobilize the best defenders to search out and destroy the invaders. And each system has a memory that can recognize and learns from every attack. And then you've got the metamorphosis process. For example, as we talked about, 87% of insects have this process of metamorphosis, where, if, for example, a monarch butterfly for 2 weeks will eat everything it can in milkweed, and eventually builds this chrysalis, which it dissolves its brain and all its bodily organs, and 2 weeks later comes out of this beautiful monarch butterfly that can navigate 3,000 miles with a brain the size of the head of a pin. Now, this is something that cannot be explained through natural processes, and I think I'm going to be thrown off the stage here, so I'll let it go for now.
Let's give him a hand.
Thank you, Mr. Layman. That was, sorry.
All right, you want to go ahead? Okay, let me introduce Kent Martin. He's going to now
Is this
respond.
hot? Hello? All right, thank you, Mr. Layman. That was quite an opening. The topic of tonight's discussion, I was under the impression, is does God exist? And what I just heard was a tirade against, for problems with Darwinian evolution by natural selection. A couple of things I heard about for why God exists, relying on internal testimonies. I'm not sure what that refers to exactly. That sounds to me like maybe some sort of dreams or visions, and I have a problem believing that that sort of thing could be an accurate way of determining the nature of reality, given the fact that the mind is so completely fallible and want to interpret things that aren't real as being very real because of the way that the mind can find fallacies as being true. Briefly, we talked a little bit about the fact that science has not been able to establish that Darwin, through experiment, that evolution is possible. That's actually not true. The building blocks of DNA, that is amino acids, have been derived in laboratory experiments. Repeatedly, we've been able to get to the place where we can establish that absolutely the building blocks of DNA are able to be derived in a laboratory setting over and over and over again. Really briefly, Darwinian evolution by natural selection is by far the most well-established theory in the history of mankind. It is 150 years old, and no subsequent discovery has yet refuted the validity of Darwinian Darwinian evolution by natural selection. A couple of quick things. He cited Richard Goldsmith and Austin Clarke in 1930, the book about the problems with evolution. That book is 80, 90 years old. That book was written before Crick and Watson, before the discovery of the DNA double helix. I'm kind of surprised that's being cited as an authoritative reference today, given there's been so much research done subsequently regarding how DNA works and how evolution actually works, the building blocks of natural selection being genetic mutation. That hadn't even been discovered yet in 1930. That kind of surprises me that was brought up. No transitional forms, Mr. Layman. You are looking at a transitional form, and you're looking at one every time you look at the mirror. A couple of big ones that I can cite being the Archaeopteryx, which is sort of it's a theropod dinosaur, which kind of was a transitional form between dinosaurs and birds. Australopithecus, very famous. Lucy is a transitional form between early primates and what would later become the building tree of the branch of Homo sapiens. Ambulocetus, which was a whale cetacean transitional form between dinosaurs and mammalian cetaceans. So there are lots of transitional forms in the fossil records. A simple Wikipedia search will reveal those to you, sir. An ad hominem attack on Darwin, that he was a sexist. Just because Darwin may or may not have been a sexist does not mean his theory does not hold water. That's a fallacious attack on Darwin. Scientists know better than evolution. Scientists know better than to believe in evolution. Sir, a 2009 Pew poll of scientists, this is the most recent one, 97% of scientists say humans evolved from earlier forms. 87% of those scientists say that's due to natural processes. So I'm not sure that your 3% of scientists may or may not know better, but 97% I think know the truth, which is that humans evolved from earlier forms. So I'm not sure what scientists you're citing there, but that's not what the massive majority of those do. You also cited the eye as a good example of design. The eye, sir, is a poor example of design. The blood supply for the eye travels in front of the retina. This is a very, very poorly engineered thing because it means that we are not able to see a huge field of our vision, and we are basically, the brain is correcting for this by hallucinating a large part of what we see. The blood supply should be routed around the back of the retina as it is in other forms. It's not done so in humans and in other higher mammals. Not a good design. An engineer would not design it that way. Certainly the architect of the universe should know better. Bad design, bad engineering. The brain itself is an evolutionary... How much time do I have left on the screen?
You're still got a minute 20.
Oh, great. Thank you. The brain itself is a wonderful journey to evolution. If we look at the brain journeying in from the outside in, we find in the human brain the outer areas are involved in cognitive reasoning and processing. We have the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and as we go deeper and deeper into the brain, we get into things like the limbic region, the brainstem, the amygdala, and these are structures that we share with the earliest creatures on this planet, being the fish, the amphibians, the earliest creatures to transition onto the land. There's lots of evidence in your very own body that you evolved from earlier creatures. Really quick, ladies and gentlemen, did you know that 8% of your DNA comes from viruses? That is retroviruses, that are viruses that insert their DNA into our genetic code. So not only did we evolve, we co-evolved with other species that, particularly retroviruses, that inserted their genetic code into ours, specifically the protein that codes for the ability for the blastocyst to be able to adhere to the uterine wall. So we couldn't be able to reproduce without the fact that a virus co-evolved with us, got into the genetic screen somewhere in our distant past, and enabled us to be able to reproduce. So it's not just even that we evolved, it's that other things evolved alongside us and put their DNA inside of us. It's pretty fascinating stuff. The evidence is overwhelming. Didn't hear a lot of arguments for the existence of God. Did hear some really, really bad arguments that evolution is wrong. And I think I've just presented some pretty good arguments that evolution is absolutely valid. Scientists believe it. That's it. Thank you very much.
All right, Chris, could you give your counter argument?
Great. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Microphone a little closer.
Oh.
Oh, it doesn't.
How's that now? Am I picking up? Excellent. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'd like to thank everybody in attendance tonight for giving up their Friday night to listen to what has already become a very stimulating debate. I'd also like to thank Backyard Skeptics and Calvary Chapel for helping organize this event, and the City of Villa Park for the use of their facilities. Now, the God claim is way beyond mere creationism. My argument against the proposition, does God exist, with respect to specific Christian claims, is formulated with the following 4 main points. 1. Scientific analysis does not support biblical claims. 2. Critical evaluation of the Bible does not support inerrancy. 3. Critical evaluation of the Bible shows several incorrect prophecy. 4. The nature of the Christian triune deity is illogical. First, scientific analysis does not support biblical claims. There are many Christians who are non-literalists and believe, oh dear, in a divinely guided theory of evolution. However, I believe my debate opponents are literalists and young earth creationists, and I hope I do you gentlemen no wrong. So I will argue that science does not support young earth creationism with the following example. The order of creation in Genesis describes plants existing before the sun and stars. This is preposterous. Without the sun, planet Earth would be much too cold, on the order of negative 450 degrees Fahrenheit, which is far too cold for life to exist. Second point, critical evaluation of the Bible does not support inerrancy. Considering the Synoptic Gospels alone, Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great in Matthew, but in Luke, he's born during the census during the reign of Quirinius in Syria. These events took place 10 years apart. After Jesus was baptized, he was transported to the wilderness by Satan and Mark, but in John, he begins his ministry. The time of the temple clearing is different. In the beginning of Jesus' ministry in John, or at the end of Jesus' ministry in the other 3 Gospels. Judas's reason for betraying Jesus in Matthew was for the money, but because of satanic influence in Luke. Now, to reconcile these differences, the apologist needs to engage in gospel writing and injects new meaning into the Jesus story. However, It's important to note these complex inconsistencies because it shows what the authors were trying to prove. It was the point they were trying to make. And sometimes it was criticism of earlier authors. It is important to recognize them for what they are. But this is not how history is written. This is how, as various historians such as Bart Ehrman described, mythology being, or mythography being written. 3. Critical evaluation of biblical prophecy. The destruction of Tyre given in Ezekiel is presented such that Nebuchadnezzar destroys Tyre. However, Tyre still exists with a population estimated to be over 100,000. It is unreasonable to reinterpret the passage to refer to both Nebuchadnezzar, who is named, and Alexander the Great, who succeeded but is unnamed. The destruction of Egypt by Nebuchadnezzar is another failed prophecy. In Ezekiel, he is described as conquering Egypt, but in fact, he was defeated in his invasion attempt. Other prophecy, the Nile drying up in Ezekiel, not quite. Egyptians speaking the dead language of the Canaanites, again, not so much. And Israel living in peace with its neighbors in Ezekiel. Unfortunately, this one is not true either. And keep in mind, the penalty for false prophecy is death. Last, 4th, the nature of the Christian triune deity is illogical. He is merciful, but sentences people to infinite punishment for finite crime. He is just, but presumably Jeffrey Dahmer is in heaven after his baptism and acceptance of Jesus Christ in prison. Can the same be said for his victims? He is love, but commands the Israelites to commit genocide against the Amalekites, all the way down to the last terrified child. God has complete knowledge of all things to happen in the future, yet we have free will to accept or reject Jesus. This is a classic example of cognitive dissonance. When you have one idea in your brain at one time, it's okay. When you have the other idea in your brain at the other time, it's okay. But when you try to have both ideas in your brain at the same time, your head begins to hurt. And with that, I will turn it back over to the moderator. Thank you.
Okay, we're now going to turn things around, and we're going to start with Kent Martin. He's going to give his talk about why he believes that God does not exist, and then we'll have responses from the two Davids here. Okay, so Kent, would you please give your talk on why you believe God does not exist?
I feel like we're going to get tired of our side here.
7.5 minutes.
We're weighted. Oh, give me a sec. Let me. Okay. All right. So the question: does God exist? I mean, now my question is, which God are we talking about? I mean, coming into this thing. I mean, are we talking about Thor? Are we talking about Vishnu? Are we talking about Zeus? Are we talking about Allah? There's a lot of gods out there. I think by last count, there's something like 3,500 major deities currently being worshipped on this planet. So, I mean, I'm an equal opportunity person here. I want to make sure nobody's being discriminated against. So, if there are any Zoroastrians here tonight, just take it as read that even though we're presumably discussing the triune God of the Trinity, the Yahweh God, your God doesn't exist either. So just go ahead and take it as read that your God's looped in with Yahweh. So presumably we're talking about Yahweh of the Trinity, the Christian God, the Christian deity. And the reason that we're having the debate about Yahweh is because we are tonight residing in the state of California in the United States of America, which is a predominantly Christian nation. And the reason that most people in the United States are Christian is because they are brought up Christian. That is because the reason that people choose a religion is not by choice, it's by upbringing and environment. It's not because someone wants to be a certain religion, it's because that's the religion they're brought into. If we were in Saudi Arabia right now, we'd be debating, well, maybe not Saudi Arabia. if we were in some sort of, maybe Turkey, if we were in a liberal Islamic, republic democracy, we'd be debating Allah. If we that's the nature of this thing. It's what you're brought into. You don't choose religion. Overwhelmingly, people are of the religion they're brought into. And the reason for this is because since the dawn of behaviorally modern Homo sapiens, which all the evidence tells us is right around 50,000 years ago, mankind has been in the business of inventing gods. And we've been doing this left and right for about the last 50,000 years. And that is because mankind has this insatiable need to explain why things happen. And before about 300 years ago, in the advent of our modern understanding of the universe and science and the scientific method,
we didn't have a really good way to explain something. And so when something happened, we just sort of invented a god for it. So when there was a good harvest, we invented a god for that. Or when there was thunder, we invented a god for that. Or when there was rain, we invented a god for that. And we did this over and over and over again for a very long time. And if you do a study of comparative mythology, you'll find that we've been doing this for quite some time. So the curious position that the believer in Yahweh finds him or herself in is concluding quite irrationally that all of these other people were crazy, but I alone am sane in my belief that my God in particular is correct. But all of these other ones, they were all false, they were all mistaken, their beliefs were founded on false premises, they had not good reasons or reasoning processes for coming up with their belief, but I alone am correct in my belief. And to me that is a fundamental lack of applying basic reasoning processes to one's own thinking. And that is the position of any believer in a God today, that I alone am correct in my beliefs, but everyone else all throughout history has been mistaken. And the curious thing about the mind of the human being is that it's so easily mistaken. And it seems like this may have been something we've been doing for a long time. And one of the interesting theories about why this happens is something we call attribution error. And it goes back to the way that the mind was formed and how we are able to, our higher reasoning was formed. And it goes back to something we call a false positive. So this is Michael Shermer's theory, and it goes something like this. So imagine that you're 30,000 years ago, or sorry, about 2.5 million years ago, and you're on the plains of Africa, and you hear a rustling in the bushes behind you. It could be a tiger or it could be the wind. Now, if you think that it is the wind and it's a tiger, you get eaten, and guess what? You've just won the Darwin Award, and you are out of the genetic line. But if you assume that it is the wind, if you assume that it's a tiger and it's actually the wind, and you run, there's really no penalty for that. You just ran. And so you were rewarded, nature rewarded you, evolution rewarded you for your survival, and those are the genes that survived, and that's the behavior that was adaptive and survived over time. And so our brains evolved being rewarded for making false positive decisions and finding attribution and attributing causality to things that had no causal relationship between each other. And the same thing arose with prayer. So when people got together and prayed and they had a good harvest, they said, well, we obviously had a good harvest because we prayed. Now, when people got together and prayed and had a bad harvest, selective memory, confirmation bias, again, the fallacies that the mind commits. We said, well, we didn't pray hard enough, maybe God was asleep that day, it was his bowling league night, whatever. And that's the thing that happened over time. So again, human beings make false positive decisions about the causal links between things all the time. False attribution errors, we do this constantly. The brain is constantly doing this, and that's the problem with making decisions based on our own reasoning, is that it's constantly prone to failure and finding inferences between things that aren't actually causally related. That leads us up to a few hundred years ago, when we have the dawn of light for mankind, the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, and we have this new thing called the scientific method. The scientific method enables us to understand the real nature of reality because it establishes a basis for understanding through experimentation, observation, positing a postulate and a hypothesis, and then going through the process of understanding how things really work. That leads us up to Galileo, Copernicus, up onto Newton, Einstein, onto Darwin, Einstein, onto today. And now we live in a world of light where we don't need angels and devils and vampires and Easter bunnies and tooth fairies and ghosts and zombies or any of these things to explain the fundamental workings of our universe. We have the theory of evolution, and we have relativity, general and special, and we have quantum dynamics, and we understand how the universe works through observation and repeated experimentation. And we have lots of ways of establishing how things actually work in reality, not just how we want things to work through faith, or how we've been told things to work through an ancient book written in the Bronze Age, with ridiculous arcane laws that go on for days and days and days, with all kinds of great reasons to stone people. Read Leviticus. There's never a good reason not to stone somebody. God's very happy with that reason to stone somebody. That's where we are today. We don't need these ridiculous arcane rules, this ridiculous arcane book. We don't need gods to explain our origin. We have perfectly reasoned and sound arguments to explain the reason how we got here, why the universe is here, how the universe works, what physics is, what it looks like, and how it works. And in the modern era, let me just say this really quickly, and I'm running out of time. In the modern era, ladies and gentlemen, you and I, even if you are a person of faith, you live your life maybe through faith, but you also live your life like the scientific method is valid. Because if you get sick, you may pray, that is true, but you also call your doctor and go and get penicillin. And that is because you believe in the scientific method, and you believe in the germ theory of disease. And if you believe in the germ theory of disease and the scientific method, then you believe in the scientific underpinnings which discovered it and uncovered it. And guess what? Those same scientific underpinnings do not prove that God does not exist, because science has a very hard time proving a negative. But it does allow us to illuminate a universe that does not require a God to explain its existence. Science allows us to illuminate a universe that requires no God for its existence. And that's the beautiful thing about science. So ladies and gentlemen, even if you're a person of faith, you still live your life through science. If you have a cell phone in your pocket, and if you call your doctor for medicine, then guess what? You're living in the modern age of science. Thank you very much.
All right, David Layman will now give his response to Kent's remarks.
I thought we were going to have them present. Oh,
Do they both go first?
Yes, they both should go first. That's what's on the schedule.
Okay. So he goes first then?
Oh, then he's going to go next. Chris is going to go next? Okay.
That's correct. Thank you.
Fine.
Also, I'd like to correct myself that I should be thanking the Christian Century Toastmasters Club, not Calvary Chapel. But I'll thank both of them anyway. Tonight, I present to you the argument that it is reasonable and rational to reject the premise that God exists. Now, for the sake of clarification, I do not claim to be able to prove that God does not exist. If I were to make a positive claim for the non-existence of God, the burden of proof would be on me to supply evidence to support my claim. I don't think such evidence exists based on the wide range of what is God, where does he exist, and how does he work. However, when specific God claims and arguments are made, they can be evaluated and accepted or rejected based on the merits of the claim. Are the claims consistent with the prevailing scientific consensus? Are the claims historically accurate, or at least historically likely? Are the actions and or nature of the deity logical? If the deity has issued instructions to human beings, are these instructions moral or ethical? Based on all the answers to these four questions, I have found it reasonable to reject all God claims presented so far. Now, does this sound familiar to any of the theists in the room? Have you not done the same for all God claims save your own? But I digress. The most common argument used to show that atheism is not rational are different variations on the teleological or argument from design. It's broken into several subsets, ranging the whole of cosmology to evolution. The first subset, the argument that the universe is finely tuned for life. Keep in mind, the universe is actually incredibly hostile to life. An overwhelming portion of the universe is either too hot or too cold for life to exist. Stars explode into supernovas, collapse into black holes, destroying everything in their wake. We are reminded of the indifference of the universe by the occasional meteorite that strikes the surface of the Earth or the massive solar flare that affects us from the sun. The Earth has a finite window for supporting life. One day our sun will exhaust its fuel supply and the Andromeda galaxy will be coming crashing into ours. It will be a very lousy day on planet Earth. This points to a universe where life is a happy accident. Next, the argument that certain cosmological ratios are finely tuned to support life. For example, it is claimed that the ratio of protons to electrons is finely tuned, a maximum deviation of 10 to the negative 32nd power. If the ratio were larger, there would be insufficient chemical binding. If smaller, electromagnetism would dominate gravity, preventing galaxy, star, and planet formation. However, Dr. Victor Stringer, in his book, The Fallacy of Fine-Tuning, rebuts this claim, arguing that the number of electrons should exactly equal the number of protons because charge conservation is expected from our zero-sum model of the universe. The number is not fine-tuned, it is exactly what our model predicts. Next, the argument that abiogenesis is statistically impossible. These arguments invoke several key flaws that are not part of the theory of abiogenesis. According to Ian Musgrave in his article, Lies, Damned Lies, Statistics, and Probability of Abiogenesis Calculations, he cites the following problems. They calculate probability of the formation of a modern protein, or even a complete bacterium with all modern proteins by random events. This is not the abiogenesis theory at all. They assume there's a fixed number of proteins with fixed sequences for each protein that are required for life. They calculate the probability of sequential trials rather than simultaneous trials. They seriously underestimate the number of functional enzymes and ribozymes present in a group of random sequences. The first living things could have been single self-replicating molecules, similar to the self-replicating peptide from the Ghihardi group or the self-replicating hexanucleotide, or possibly an RNA polymerase that acts on itself. Next, the subset of arguments from irreducible complexity and intelligent design. The eye is not irreducibly complex. There are 8 well-known evolutionary stages of the eye that can be found in the Richard Dawkins book, Climbing Mount Improbable. All these stages exist in creatures living today, starting from the photosensitive cell, working all the way up to the complex eye with muscles allowing the lens to adjust. Nielsen and Pelger calculated in 1994 if each step were a 1% change, then the evolution of the eye would take 1,829 steps, which could happen in 354,000 generations. Not too bad. The analogy has been made that if a single part is removed from a mousetrap, the mousetrap is useless. True, it's useless as a mousetrap, but it functions quite well as a tie clip, which I made from a mousetrap I picked up from Home Depot. The point is that successful species are remarkable at adapting to their environments. What's the use of half a wing? Well, you may not be able to fly, but you may be able to glide, and that just might be enough to survive a fall or escape a predator. The major problem with intelligent design is this. It does not conform to the scientific method because intelligent design proposes untestable hypotheses. However, what is worse, that intelligent design takes wide swatches of cosmology and biology and argues that there is no reason to research further. There is no reason to research further because if such things were supernaturally blinked into existence, then there would be no way for humans to understand it with our naturalistic worldview. Consider Isaac Newton, who with all his brilliance could not figure out how the universe remained stable. So he invoked God to cover what he could not figure out. If other people following him merely accepted his intelligent design argument and stopped researching, we wouldn't be nearly as far along today in our knowledge of the universe. To summarize, all of the arguments invoke the same flaw, arguments from incredulity and ignorance. Does science have all the answers? No. But I argue that it is more rational to say, I don't know, but I want to find out. I want to know what the answers are to the really difficult questions we have, rather than claim, I don't know based on faith, or have belief without reason. Thank you.
Okay, so David, can you now give your responses to the 2 talks we just had?
Shall I stay here? Right here?
Where you like.
Well, I'm not sure where to begin. But I think just to kind of compare what we have to choose from, Christianity stands totally separate from all these other religions. I think there's only one actual other religion outside of Christianity, and it's a form of paganism. We have lots of different variations. I can construct almost any religion with Christianity and paganism. You can take Islam, for example, and I have 22 sources for Islam. They believe that the earth, there's 7 earths, flat like a carpet, according to the Quran. And you have to read Ibn Ishaq al-Muslim al-Bukhari and Tabari to kind of confirm what the Quran actually teaches. But it shows that there are 500 walking years between each earth, that the earth sit on a they're resting on a fish called a noon, which is on top of a bowl, which is on top of a cube, which is on top of dust, and only Allah knows what's under the dust. And above the seventh earth are 8 giant goats with 500 years between their front hooves and their back hooves. Shooting stars or missiles God throws at demons to keep them out of heaven, and the sun sets in a murky pool surrounded by a bunch of people. So this is what Muhammad basically taught in the area of cosmology and cosmogony. And we look at human hygiene. It's okay to drink, camel urine mixed with milk is supposed to have great medicinal value. If a fly falls in your soup, one wing has the germs, the other has the antidote. I've debated the antidote on one wing of a fly. So, I mean, we're looking at what we have here. We could go back into, for example, Buddhism. We can pretty much name most of the religions of the world. Christianity, the world is the loving creation of God. In Buddhism, it's only a temporary illusion of a deluded mind. In Christianity, God will either glorify or punish the spirit of man. In Buddhism, there's no spirit to be glorified or punished. In Christianity, absolute morality is a central theme. In Buddhism, absolute morality is non-existent. And Christianity is essentially theistic. Buddhism is essentially atheistic. Buddhism teaches reincarnation but denies the soul, so what can possibly reincarnate? Spiritually enlightened bodhisattvas vow to work for the enlightenment of all beings, fully knowing no being such beings ever existed. So how can one grant wisdom and compassion on non-entities? Why should enlightened beings toy with illusions? Why help save a thing which, according to a Buddhist philosophy, must save itself? Since the goal of Buddhism is to destroy the individual person who is merely an illusion, everything else precious to the individual must also be destroyed. And that's the whole purpose. He thought that basically the suffering was the result of existing. So the best way to get rid of that is to get rid of existence. And, as one Buddhist convert to Christianity says, I didn't want nirvana, I wanted eternal life. And we can go back into, for example, Hinduism. And I basically spent 20-some years at Purdue University, and we would talk about a different world religion every week for that entire 20-year period. And who would show up but the people that belonged to that particular group. They wanted to make sure we weren't misrepresenting them. But really, I learned a lot from them, and then I spent some time in India and studied these things. But what did they actually teach? One of the things about Christianity is that it was not done in a vacuum. The early New Testament apostles would appeal to the knowledge of the hearers when they were appealing to the things. These were not done in a corner, most noble Festus. They appealed to the fact because it was done in the history of time and space. People saw these things. It wasn't just somebody's philosophy that he came up with and wrote down and supposedly everybody has to accept it. So he said, no one can do the miracles that you do unless God be with them. That's what Nicodemus said to Jesus. If you believe not me, believe the works that I do. So these things were actually attested to the written and spoken words of the apostles and the prophets. If somebody's parting the Red Sea, I'm going to listen to that guy. And so when God allows these miracles, God didn't need a person to do this miracle or to go through anybody. But by going through them, their written and spoken words took on a special meaning. And I think that's one of the reasons why we can, there are so many things that brought up. I would like to jump on this, but I'll have to wait until later to address some of these issues, particularly the prophecies, the detailed prophecies, and the fact if life came from the laboratory with the millions of dollars that we've invested, we should be able to find some form of viable alternative teleonomic life form, some cell. Nobody's been able to produce that.
Okay, now David Penrose will give his response to the remarks.
I'm perplexed. I'm perplexed because I've heard a lot of humor. I've heard quite a bit of sarcasm. I've heard hints of nihilism. And I've heard a lot of tangential discussion of scientific phenomena where man bears similar traits and experiences to other life forms. And I guess in my simple way of approaching this debate this evening, I thought that we were tasked with answering the question, is there a God, or does God exist? I'd be the very first person to tell you that if you want to obsess over the imperfections of sacred writings, you will have no shortage of content and material to obsess over. Here's what I like to say, and I'm a Christian. I believe that there is a God. I believe there is one God. And I also believe that the perfect explanation does not require an explanation. To say that something miraculous comes out of nothing never happens. We've never observed it. There's always something from which something can come, can evolve. I concede that as a species, as a human form, we've changed, we've adapted. You can't travel anywhere in God's creation and ignore the fact that people living under unique geographic circumstances bear differences unobservable to other individuals living under different circumstances. Whether we're talking about the sub-Saharan desert or whether we're talking about Bismarck, North Dakota, people are different. People adapt. I'm not going to talk to you about the phenomena of how that adaptation takes place because, frankly, I don't have the time or the interest. What I am interested in is how a person can believe that as a result of a phenomenon that we'll call the Big Bang, when nothing existed, believing in physics that for any motion to be changed, it requires a force of equal energy, there has to be an attributable cause. Explain to me how out of nothing something can come, and I'll listen. My explanation is that as a finite being, I cannot know what I do not know. Now, I read a writing, and we'll call it a sacred writing, call it the Holy Bible. I believe that a person inspired by God wrote, "Now I know in part." But there will come a point in which I will know in full, even as I am fully known. I admit my inability to comprehend most of the facts and details which are shared. And I'm not going to argue those, I'm not going to debate those, because my mind doesn't understand some of those things. Does that mean that they're all an illusion? Does that mean that they're a hallucination of the mind, as our humorous and skeptic friend has pointed out? Interesting fact, however, it was pointed out that Christians who are slow to accept science still rely on penicillin. John T. Jones published in September 2013 in the Journal of Public Health data which shows that in the United States, medical error accounts for the third largest cause of death in the United States. Medical error. I say going to a hospital and praying is probably more successful than relying on fallible physicians. Thank you.
All right, well, we're now going to have a 10-minute break. And we have a few snacks over here and water, and we have some resources you can take a look at. And then afterward, we're going to have an opportunity for you to ask your own questions, so you can start thinking about what you'd like to ask. But not in 10 minutes.
I just want to make sure you did want to get on that.
Yeah, on the list.
I so want to say something.
No, for the audience, and I wanted to say this before we started, but we didn't have enough Christians in the audience. Are you guys always late? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Nora, I know that there's circumstances.
They got raptured.
I'm Bruce from back here at Skeptic, so I'm obviously on this side of the bench right here. But how many people here are atheists? Raise your hands. And I see it is a bride and groom thing here. That's what I thought, yeah. And how many people of those atheists are back here? Skeptics members? I take it most? Okay, very good. Thank you for coming. Yahoo. And how many are on the Christian side? I believe that. Very nice, very nice. And thank you for coming as well. We usually say this at the very beginning. And just on the Christian side, I wanted to ask you, how many people believe Jesus is coming? Raise your hands. How many people think that Jesus will be coming back in the next 500 years? Raise your hands. Hopefully. Okay. And how many people think that he's coming back in our lifetime, in your lifetime? Okay. Okay. Good to know. Well, he better come back quick then. Okay. So I'm going to introduce you to Dave Clarke again, and he's going to reintroduce very quickly for the people who came in.
3 days.
And is that all right, Dave?
Yes. Yes, once again, this is a debate between representatives of the backyard skeptics from the atheist point of view and from the Christian Century Toastmasters Club representing the Christian point of view. And our idea is to express what we think about some important questions and have an opportunity to without being criticized or in any way have problems with it, to be able to say what we think. And so each group is representing their thoughts, and we're going back and forth so we can maybe learn something, see what other people have think about some important things, and I think we can grow that way. So now is the opportunity for your ideas, okay? We'll give you the chance first, and tell us who you'd like to refer to first, and then the others can just chime in. So who would you like to talk to?
Please approach the Q&A microphone. Last time, not everybody could hear us, so thank you, Damien.
I would like to address.
David Layman?
David,
Okay.
yes. David, I would like to address the fact that you brought up DNA. Made me feel very happy, because then we could talk on the same playing field. So I would say to you, do you know that the human genome that we have now is not fully human? In other words, we have other humanoids in our DNA. Did you know that 1 to 4% of DNA has been found to be Neanderthal, especially when it is in Northern Europe? Did you also know that 4 to 6% of Asian DNA has Devonitin? Did you also know that 2% of Sub-Saharan African has an unknown genome that is other than the human we have now? So if God created us, why is there a different DNA? Another question is, let's say that God did make these other entities. The question also would be, when the Noah's flood happened, wouldn't all the DNA been basically bottlenecked? So we should have not Asian one, Sub-Saharan African another, Northern Europe another. It's not even close to logical scientifically. And that we absolutely can prove it. It's not a guess. It's not even speculation. It is DNA.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else would like to respond to this question?
Davis.
Yes, a lot of people thought that when we started studying minute things, we would somehow prove evolution to be something that could actually take place naturally. But the more we study reductionism, the more we realize that it couldn't happen naturally. The more detail we get, the more complex it gets. And so when Darwin thought about the cell, he was thinking of something similar to a ping pong ball in complexity. But now we know that the cell itself is so complex that we don't even understand some of the details of how this works. The ribosomes, are taking the copy of the DNA. So the question, the answer to the question is, Um, we have, for example, there is a tremendous amount of information. Yes, you come through the ark and there was a bottleneck. Yes, it does show. If you want to marry somebody that is opposite to you, you can continue to keep all of the different variations within that particular kind. You could have a bunch of cats, for example, and those cats have four genes, 2 long-haired and 2 short-haired genes. You move them to northern Siberia, and after a while, pretty soon all you have is long-haired genes, because the other long-haired cats, because the others froze to death. So there is what you're doing is you're losing information. You're not gaining information. Information does not come outside of what's given to you at the original person. So yes, there are variations within the kind, but the variations do not happen as a result of, for example, environment. For example, the changes in environment do not change or add information. So where is this information coming from? Well, according to Ernest Mayr, the only mechanism that would cause evolution to occur at all is mutation. Mutation is like shooting a bullet at a chromosome, destroying some of the information. It's not adding any new information. And as specificity increases, the role played by spontaneity decreases. The more complex that system is, the less likely a random process is going to increase that complexity. So whatever was given to you, you can lose it. You can lose it, in certain cases, but you can never gain information. And that information had to be in place right from the very beginning.
All right. Do we have any other responses to this from our panel?
That's right, back and forth.
Are we allowed to interrupt when he's talking?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Oh, well, let him finish first, but then you can respond if you have something else.
Are you picking people to raise their hand, or are we
Well,
supposed to line up at the
no,
mic?
I'd like to finish this question first, okay, and then
Let
I'll call on people.
Let me say, the way it was set up is that I will answer, whoever one of us will answer, and then they get 2 minutes to rebut my answer. That's the way.
That's the format?
So we take 3 minutes, they take 2 minutes, then the next one is addressed to them, they go for 3 minutes, and one of us will rebut for 2
The only
minutes.
exception to that, Dave, is that if we might have a question that's addressed to you, that it's, we should accept that question. It isn't back and forth from their standpoint, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Go ahead, Ken.
Okay, so if we have maybe another couple minutes, if any of you would like to respond as well?
Here.
Did you have something? Okay, maybe, no, nothing at this point?
No, I mean,
Okay.
go ahead.
I was just going to ask really quick, David. So you mentioned that, logically speaking, it's impossible. It would make sense to add information over time, so that lower-ordered creatures, less complex creatures, should have less information in them, and higher-ordered creatures should have more information in them. Would that be your supposition?
Except for the fact that the frog has 1 trillion base pairs, so I'm not exactly sure how that works.
Okay, so my question to you is this. Chimpanzees have 48 chromosomes. Humans, curiously, have 46. Now, the scientifically accepted theory for this is that at some point in the evolutionary distance between chimpanzee and human, a pair of chromosomes merged. And that is why we find the telomeres in one of those pairs have formed into centromeres, which is what happens when a chromosome fuses in on itself and you have the 48th pair becomes one single pair. And so my question to you is, if your theory is correct, which is that information should be increasing, why is it that the pairs fused if the chimpanzees are not, if they're not indeed evolutionary related to humans, and that they're lower on the evolutionary chain of life than we are? Explain that, please.
Well, as Mendel noticed, the gene had to be there in the first place, and Mendel's research showed that you don't gain information, but you can, with certain hybrids, you can show other phenotypes. For example, you can actually a brown-eyed person and a blue-eyed person, and you can get somebody, but they don't have something between brown and blue eyes. One thing Mendel noticed is that one gene takes a dominant place. But you don't, again, you're not adding information unless you marry. And you have to somehow get a reproducing system in order to add any information. Yes, it come from the other partner. You can gain information that way.
Well,
But apart from that, you can't gain information.
The key example I can think of for creation of information why don't we use penicillin anymore? Information, we have bacteria that are resistant to various drugs. This, I would think, was a nice counterexample of information cannot be created.
Well, we all have an immune system, and some of these bacteria also have a system which will allow them to survive, but in no case do they add information. What they do is, for example, they won't produce a particular protein which normally would kill them, so they become less viable. And that does happen, yes. There are certain triggers within our system that allows things like, for example, the immune system to kick in when we're threatened biologically in other ways. But that system had to be in place right from the start.
If I can just briefly return to my own question.
Why don't we just be this last
Okay,
one?
okay, really quickly. I wasn't talking about genes. I'm talking about an entire chromosome. And I appreciate your response to my question, but the scientifically accepted explanation, the only explanation that makes sense for the disappearance of an entire chromosome pair is that it merged at some point in the history of our evolution. That's the only thing that makes any sense. An entire pair disappeared, and the only thing that makes sense is that that pair got fused together, because we see evidence of that in the fact that the telomeres were fused into centromeres. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Next question. Why don't we? I think we'll have a little line here, so you probably will. Okay.
Hi there. I don't really feel you addressed the question of why do you believe that there is a God. Frankly, I personally think God is irrelevant. I lead a good, moral, ethical life, and if I die, and who knows what's going to happen. You know, if I dance in heaven with one of my husbands, which one, who knows. Yes. But in any event, but I don't see any reason that your belief systems help you or anyone in their day-to-day life. I mean, I don't get it. I don't get what you get out of it, and I don't understand why you didn't really address the question, why you do believe there's a God. So that was kind of what my question is, and that's probably to both of you.
How about David Penrose? I know I know you have a good
Yeah, and I kind of feel that we're talking about a lot of different things except for that question.
Yeah, that's what I felt.
And a lot of times being devoted to genetics and DNA and chromosomes.
Give it, David.
And while I certainly think those are admirable, worthy academic topics to talk about, for a 2-hour discussion or debate, you know, it's much, much broader than what we can ever talk about. So I really do appreciate your question. The question in terms of, for me, do I believe there's a God, and why do I believe there's a God? For me, I wouldn't necessarily say logic. I say reasoning, the way that I was created, the way that I am, we'll say, causes me to ask the question, what came into being? What caused something to come into being? If you say that everything came into existence as we know it, the physical, natural, tangible world came into existence as a result of a single event, what caused that event? There's never been anything that we've observed that out of nothing comes nothing. So for me, the only reasonable answer is that there is an eternal being which had willed it and designed it to be so, and regardless of what the events were, do I know? No, because I have a finite mind. But I accept that some being, and I call him God, and I don't call him because I attribute him, you know, to being a male. God is God, and for me, I believe in God because that explains how something could happen when nothing else.
What does it matter?
What does it matter?
I mean, what difference does it, I'm being serious. I mean, what difference does it make if...
Well, that's like, you know, pardon my analogy, but that's like asking why do I feel compelled to go to the bathroom? I mean, there are observable phenomena that we can talk about and explain. But the discussion for the panel was, is there a God? And I just simply shared with you my reasoning why I believe that there is a God. Because until there's compelling evidence that shows how from nothing something came into being, something so totally miraculous is what you witnessed, and I guarantee you, Even though some of you may believe in vibrational medicine, we are not an illusion. We are real. There is a physical, natural order to who we are and how we live and how we die and how we reproduce. But there's something at work beyond that, something that had to exist before that. The nature of God. We haven't talked about the nature of God, an agreement that God is eternal. You know, people have tried to introduce morals and ethics, and you know, but we never returned to the question.
So I'd argue this is the key difference between you and me, that when there's a question of, well, I don't know exactly how abiogenesis happened. I don't know what happened before the first Planck time. The answer I come to is, I don't know. We may never know. I wish I could, but it's just, as we would say, not in the stars. But I don't think it's reasonable to say I don't know and then invent some cause or some deity and say I believe without reason and this fills in my gaps. It's a very unpleasant feeling to think that, to have that I don't know, and this is not just a little question, this is sort of the questions that our species have asked from the first time we could actually get together and have conversations like this.
Since we're not quite structured, I'd like to address her question. We have, God is love, at least that's what the Bible teaches. And He's created us in His image with a tremendous capacity for relationship, which if not met, leaves us feeling empty. And a lot of people try to fill that emptiness with something other than God. They try to find a life partner to try to fill that emptiness. Sometimes because of the pain of emptiness, they go into drugs or alcohol or some other form of trying to seek pleasure to avoid the pain of emptiness. But God has chosen, He's made us for Himself. As David describes in the Psalm, whom do I have in heaven but Thee, O Lord, and besides Thee I desire nothing else. As a deer pants for the water brook, so my soul thirsts for Thee. And I believe that God can satisfy the emptiness of every human heart. And once He is there, He can come in and my question is really, why wouldn't you seek God? Deuteronomy 4:29, he that seeks me with his whole heart will find me. So if you really seek Him, you're going to find Him.
Well, actually, I would put that right. I think having a real person rather than a physical person
The microphone.
fills me a lot, so.
Can we limit
Did we-
the answer
Yes.
time?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Could there be a limit to answering times?
Did we use up all of our 2 minutes in our response?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
No, the time is now complete for the 3 and the 2.
Okay.
Okay. So why don't we say that the whole thing cannot be more than, say, 7 minutes.
Okay.
So 7 minutes will be the limit in terms of all the discussion.
Okay.
Deborah, you're going to be taking care of that?
Could you?
I don't want to be rude, but I think we might have been a little bit into a time warp. It was a very long 3 minutes. So if you don't come to you, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So if you could have
It wasn't
the
timing
red
the
light by
question, that
7
was only
minutes.
timing the
Yeah.
answer.
I understand. Not your fault.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Scott. Thanks everyone for coming and doing this. This is pretty cool. I had 2 really short questions. I didn't have, my first question was so short I thought maybe I should probably come up with another one. And the second one I was really excited because I've got, you know, I'm an atheist, and so some of my questions I can't get answered by other atheists just because they're just different mindsets, right? So for my first question, I'd like to ask the gentleman right here, because you brought up about prayer and medicine and instead of going to the hospital or something like that. And one of the comments that you made was that you said that, and I want to make sure I get this correct, because it was that the most common cause of death is medical error. And the third, okay.
In the United States,
and so,
I don't know if that's true in other countries.
And I don't have anything to back this up, but my knee-jerk response to that would be that the most common cause of death would be not medically treating it. Not going to the hospital and having something go wrong, but just not even attending it. And to combine that with double-blind studies that test the efficacy of prayer and the efficacy.
What's your question?
And the question is.
So the question is that when you combine the studies that test the efficacy of prayer and the fact that if you didn't go to the hospital, you would probably die from a huge, like I would be dead today because I had appendicitis and I would have died if I hadn't done that. How do those, with those two, how do they reconcile, how do you reconcile that statement with those other two things?
Well, the statistics on the incidence of individuals who die as a result of medical error, since about 1999, and you're not going to find this information published by the Centers for Disease Control because obviously it would be alarming. You're not going to find anybody who promotes Obama, the solution to universal health care, talk about that. But this was conducted by the Institute of Medicine, physicians, healthcare providers, allied health providers, and other entities who have looked at data specifically from Medicare and Medicaid recipients. That was the population. Now we could talk certainly as, are those individuals who receive free government assistance for their health care, are they prone to disease? I'm not saying that medical treatment isn't going to have a positive impact, but the null hypothesis being prayer doesn't make an answer cannot be proven, because there are incidents where people pray, they pray fervently, God answers that prayer, they believe it answers that prayer. My reason for making that comment was it was in 2003, the first study by the Institute of Medicine that published the incidence of death as a result from medical error in the United States, and at the time was the 6th leading cause of death. In 2012, when the last study was done, it's now risen to the 3rd leading cause of death. Medical error is misdiagnosed, mismedicated, mistreated, operating on the wrong person. So if you go into the hospital and you hope that the person isn't deluding, as we all as human beings, because we have a fallible mind, by the way, that is intentional sarcasm, have a tendency to do, that was a vain attempt at some humor, then the act that anybody actually heals and benefits from treatment should require an act of faith. So that, I mean, it's not based on a double-blind study. It's based on actual data that was collected from individuals who sought treatment and healthcare providers who documented that they provided that.
I think with that, I gets answered.
No, I just wanted to one statement you said about the Centers of Disease Control. I want to bring a point.
Actually, I'm going to have to cut that, Damien, because we just don't have time for that from anybody. We have to stay on cue here. Sorry.
So,
but you can ask him afterward.
Yeah. What I think about what's telling about that number is what's happening. Death from basically medical accidents, it's going up, right? So what's going down? So you would say that our knowledge of how to treat people, the better medicine, things that may have a few years ago put you in the morgue are now dropping down. And so what's coming up? Human error. So I think it speaks to how well medical technology is advancing. As far as prayer studies, there was it's been said that when you pray, you don't always get what you want, you get what God wants. So when you think about it that way, it may not always be a positive. It may be positive, neutral, or negative. But in a 2001 study by the Mayo Clinic, they found there was no variance. I would think that if God intervened positive, negative, or neutral, it would at least be somewhat different than the control group.
Right. And really quickly, just because there are medical errors that happen does not mean that's an indictment of medical treatment or the scientific method that medical treatment derives from. It's implemented by human beings, and human beings are inherently fallible. Just because our systems and our methods of implementing that care need some revisions and some better standards or updates or whatever, I would still, for the record, if I pass out right now, please call 911 and don't pray. Thank you. Just for the record.
I have no interest in dominating everything, so I just had another quick question. I don't know if is there time? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You guys should just say thank you, Scott.
Hi. My question is for the Christians. Having been a former Christian, I am a bit familiar with the Bible and some of its claims. According to Galatians chapter 5, the deeds of the flesh are immorality, impurity, strife, jealousy, anger, dissensions, drunkenness, carousing, etc. Whereas in verse 22, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, and faithfulness. My question to you is this. In the United States of America, there has been study after study after study showing that there's basically zero differences between believers and non-believers when it comes to morality. In fact, some studies, such as prison population, shows that the vast majority of people in prison, percentage-wise, are from your team. According to the Bible, you guys are supposed to have the Holy Spirit. You guys, if your claims are accurate, should be so much superior to everybody else that it would be obvious and it would not be a matter of dispute. My question to you is, when the Baptists come to convention town, the porno rates go way up through the roof. That's documented fact. And like I said, study after study after study. There's absolutely no proof that the Holy Spirit gives you guys any better living. How do you answer that?
The Holy Spirit came to convict the world of sin. That was one of the reasons, and the Spirit of God living in a person does do that. In fact, the fact that some Christians, maybe many of them, we still have free will. We still, God is not taking over our free will. Unfortunately, most Christians who don't spend time in the Word, sin will keep you from this book will keep you from sin. So people that meditate on the Word day and night, they'll be like that tree planted by the rivers of water that bears fruit at its season. Its leaf will not wither, and whatsoever it does will prosper. We have people that do that, and God honors them. But yes, there is a tremendous apostasy within the church today. And what you call Christian, I mean, I just heard last week, and I've heard from several of the atheists, that Hitler was a Christian. He was probably the most occultic person that ever lived, or at least one of them. And so you have to define your terms a little bit. But Christian is somebody who's been saved. He's a sinner who's been saved from his sin because of, there's three kinds of salvation. Salvation from the penalty of sin, from the power of sin in a person's life, and for eternity future, he will be saved. So the moment a person receives Christ as their personal Lord and Savior, they've been forgiven because of Christ's work, not because of our own works. We're not working to earn our salvation. That's something that was done for us. But as a result of that, most Christians want to serve God because of the love that they feel that He had for them. They want to, and Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments.
Could I hear also from the other David as to why Christianity does not work as advertised?
Oh, to say that because a person says that they've become a Christian because they have had some transformative experience, that they have immediately become liberated from all of their habits and inclinations and temptations, I find that that's not scriptural, nor is it biblical. I do think if we were to actually look at the phenomena that you're talking about that was written by Paul to the Galatians, it's a longitudinal process that you see that happening over time. I think if you look at somebody who maybe has a drug habit or an addiction to pornography today, as they grow in the faith and as they grow in understanding, it's my belief that over time that person becomes transformed, that they learn how to respond less to temptation and more to what they know to be right and just, and you say moral, and of course anybody that knows me knows I didn't want to even talk about morality and ethics tonight because I don't think they're biblical concepts, but I would say it's not just something that happens instantaneously. It's a longitudinal process.
It's the fruit of the Spirit. It does
Fruit.
happen instantaneously if it did.
But fruit is also something that grows on the tree, and evidence of the Holy Spirit working in you. I would propose are those things.
It's the Holy Spirit inside you.
Any response?
Yeah,
I don't want to talk about
Okay.
being possessed.
Let's, if you have a response, maybe just one response, because we're kind of short on
They
time
have
here.
2 minutes.
They have 2 minutes? Okay.
Well, I was just going to say briefly that if the question is, does what you believe affect how you behave, you're trying to draw a causal inference between those two things. I don't know that there's a really like an A to B way of doing that. My bet would be, Brother Penrose, if you tomorrow woke up and decided that you no longer believed what you believed, and that you were now an atheist, or you believe that the God was not the origin of the universe, that in fact the universe existed as it is purely spontaneously, that there was no first cause, there was no Aristotelian or whatever, there uncaused cause, that you would not behave any differently tomorrow, that you would not want to go out there and murder people or commit other atrocities against humankind, that you would behave no differently tomorrow than you would today as a Christian. And I think that speaks a lot to what the basis of morality is. The basis of morality it doesn't come, I don't think, from your belief personally that Christ is your Savior and Redeemer, and that you should live a good life because of that. The basis of morality, I think, comes from evolution. Evolution is the answer. We evolved morality because we needed it to survive. We're a social species. We rely on each other to survive. And morality was a necessary component to ensure our survival once we evolved a certain amount of reliance on each other as a social grouping. That, I think, is readily obvious to it's apparent that morality is an emergent property. So discussing morality in groups or morality by one group or another, I think different groups of people behave equally bad and equally good. I mean, like, people are capable of anything. I'm capable of anything. Anybody is. So the better angels of our nature dominate, and the lesser angels of our angels of our nature dominate us all. So are Christians capable of doing horrible things and looking at pornography? Absolutely. Are they less? Are they more closeted about it than we are? Perhaps so. Thank you.
7 minutes. We're up.
7 minutes. Okay, Deborah, could you have a green at 5, a yellow at 6, and a red at 7, so we kind of can know how the time's going?
Can I interrupt the moderator, sir? Just in the interest of fairness, I know we're doing 8 questions. We've already had 4 for the other side. In the interest of fairness, is there anybody online that has a question for our side? Can you step up to the front of the line, please? And could we get some more questions for our side?
Yeah. The lights go on, so we kind of know when we're.
You know, she's having a hard time with that light. Can she move like right next to us? So, because she keeps on trying to.
Sit right here.
You can move over if that's how.
Here you go, Deborah.
My name is Pete Uretta, and I want to thank the panel for doing this tonight.
Thanks for asking your question, man. You're like the lone wolf.
What I want to do is ask a question based on your point on attribution error.
Yes.
And then you made a comment about false positive and then decisions in that. And it sounded a little bit more like subjectivism in a sense, if I heard it correctly.
Okay.
So what I wanted to find out if believers or people that are religious hold to a subjective type of view, and that's how we derive our worldview. If all humans are subjective in that sense, because it would presuppose that humans are subjective, how would we know that the atheist worldview is actually true in that sense? And how do we know that to be reliable? And how do we know that this might be a threefold question, so I hope I'm making sense here, that science hasn't developed its position and constructed a worldview around that position, if that makes sense.
Okay. So let me see if I understand your question correctly. You're saying that because my point is, I was discussing the evolution of cognitive reasoning and how our brains evolved to understand reality, and how we were sort of rewarded for making bad decisions about how reality worked. And so how do I know that our view of science and the scientific method isn't another bad process for understanding reality?
Exactly. Because
Okay.
if you're saying that this worldview claims this, then it also falls on the burden of proof on you to prove your claim in that sense.
Okay, that is a fantastic question, and thank you very much for asking it. So the reason that the scientific worldview holds that the scientific method is a valid way of establishing a basis for understanding reality is that the scientific method works on observation, experimentation, and repeatability, and verification by other people who use the same method. So in other words, if I want to postulate a theory, if I want to put something out there to the community and I say, I want to explain this is how something works. This is my hypothesis, and I've conducted these experiments, and these are the results of my experiments. And then I go and publish in a major scientific journal, and then other scientists review that, and they conduct the same experiment, and then they publish their results. And if we all collaborate and corroborate, and everybody in the world gets the same result, then we know that it's valid. So the reason that the scientific viewpoint is validated is because it works by observation and repeatability, by other people all finding the same results at the same time across disparate viewpoints, different labs, different scientists, different research universities, all arriving at the same conclusion simultaneously. If there is any variance, if one scientist arrives at one different conclusion, then the whole thing gets thrown out and we go back to square one. So the reason that we know the scientific viewpoint works is because it's based on observation, repeatability, accountability, and publishing. It's not done like, in a closeted room where one person has this theory and they come up with it and they say, this is true, everybody has to believe me now. It's done by a lot of people working together in collaboration. And it's even better than that, it's because competition is what rules the game. Like, if I have the best and latest theory, everybody wants to prove me wrong. The incentive is for people to find that I'm wrong, because they'd love to find that I'm wrong. So the theories that have held up over a long period of time we know are true because everybody's been trying to prove them wrong. Everyone has been trying to prove Einstein wrong for the last 90 years. For the last 90 years, everyone has been trying to prove that you can go faster than the speed of light. And guess what? No one's been able to do it. And every year there's a new experiment of some group that's trying to find some new way to prove that the speed of light is not the speed limit of the universe, and nobody's been able to do it yet. So the reason we know that it's true is because it's held true by scientists working across all cultures, all universities in disparate groups that are all in competition with each other and all arriving at the same conclusion validated by each other. And that's why the scientific method is the best way to establish a basis for reality.
Yes.
All right, thanks.
Next question?
We have a rebuttal.
For a basis of replicability, reproducibility, some laboratory experiments, some scientifically designed experiments. I concede to that definitely is in line with the scientific method. However, as to the origin of life and our ability to create a species where no species yet existed, I've yet to see anybody successfully do that. And for your assertion to be that any phenomena that we accept and assert as being factual or at least credible would suggest then that even the Big Bang could be replicated. So I just say that it's a convenient argument to say our scientific method to a point of those things that we can create and reproduce, and yet in those major things, creating the new life form, creating a life, creating something out of nothing, to see something evolve out of basically emptiness, I think would suggest that you're expecting the other side to prove that they're right when you can't prove that you're right.
You have a response?
David? If I had a singularity in my pocket, I'd give you a Big Bang right now.
So did you have a comment, David?
No.
Or the other David later?
So hard.
Well, I think when you're referring to science, and you keep going back to this, almost every major discipline of true science was invented by somebody who was a Christian, who believed the Bible, who was, we go right back to the scientific disciplines established by Bible-believing scientists. Antiseptic surgery, Joseph Lister. Bacteriology, Louis Pasteur. Calculus, Isaac Newton. Celestial mechanics, Johann Kepler. He was more excited about his sermons than he was about his scientific discoveries. Chemistry, Robert Boyle sent out missionaries. He was comparative anatomy, Georges Cuvier. Computer science, Charles Babbage. Dimensional analysis. I mean, you go right. Dynamics, Isaac Newton. Most of us in engineering school wished he'd never come around. But electrodynamics, James Clerk Maxwell. Electrodynamics, Michael Faraday. You go right down. Lord Kelvin. I mean, these men were the ones, the founders of science. And they, a lot of times, we're looking at trying to think God's thoughts after them. So it's not science or the Bible. Usually the Bible has a lot of insights. For example, the paths of the sea, and that's the founder of oceanography, looked at the Bible, and that's where he got his ideas for doing search.
Okay. Okay, our next question.
My question has to do, well, it's probably more poignant to the actual topic at hand. It has to do with the incompatible, the unintelligible properties of Yahweh, especially in the modern understanding. The question might be more directed towards you, because you largely were dismissive of critical examination of the biblical texts. So, when you say that some of Yahweh's properties are infinite justice, infinite love, or all love, or is justice, that seems to be actually contradictory with the biblical texts, such as when David took a census and Yahweh just killed 70,000 innocent people who had absolutely nothing to do with that. Those things like that, of that nature, tend to show that the modern conception of Yahweh, as you guys hold it today, is actually inaccurate with the texts themselves, and kind of makes your God non-existent in terms as a concept. So how do you deal with the actual incompatibilities and the contradictions with Scripture as the modern day understanding of Yahweh?
I don't see any contradictions in the Scriptures themselves, but I do see the justice of God, and God in almost every one of these cases, and I wish I had time to go through each one of these cities that was warned. For example, Tyre, Sidon, Memphis, Thebes, each one of them was warned for hundreds of years by the prophets themselves. 200-300 years later, all of a sudden the judgment came. And so, we have God giving people time to repent. In fact, Nineveh did repent. And what did God repented of the evil that he was going to do them? So,
my specific example was 70,000 innocent people.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Right. I'm just.
That was my specific example, not countries that needed it, innocent people.
Right. I understand. I'm finished my sentence. But when you're talking about God's judgment on what happened, because of David's sin, there was God judged it. I don't have the specific answer as to why God did what he did, except for the fact that David did something that God had told him not to, and as a result, always people suffer because of what someone else does. There's always going to be that consequence. Why God? I don't know that these people are necessarily innocent. I don't know the people themselves. But whatever happened, God is just.
My question was, doesn't that show an incompatibility and a contradiction within what your concept is? I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but they're not.
No.
I always think of it as a funny hypothetical conversation between, say, circa 20 AD, of the person who talks about, well, I just stoned my child to death for being disobedient, and someone come over, did you hear what the Messiah is saying?
What did he say?
He said, he is without sin, cast the first stone.
Oh, man!
But it speaks to, an example to ridiculousness. But it does speak to sort of the change and evolution of the religion through time. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Well, I often think about the quote, scrawled on the wall of a German death camp. If there is a God, he's going to have to beg for my forgiveness. If I was an Amalekite, I think I might write the same thing. If I was a 5-year-old Amalekite who just, was about to be slaughtered under the orders of this just God, who commanded the Israelites to slaughter every last living thing, man, woman, child. I can't imagine what crime a 5-year-old child committed to deserve slaughter by this just God. I would say if there is a God, he's going to have to beg my forgiveness. That's what I would write on that wall.
Yes, I have a suggestion, Dave. Since we have so many people asking questions, I'd like to submit that we drop the 7 down to 5 minutes. Is that all right with everybody on the panel?
Is there any more questions for this side?
Yeah, right here.
Okay, let's let him move to the front.
So that means everybody will be able to ask the questions, these last 4 people, and that'll be it for tonight.
Okay, so.
Thank you for asking
Yeah,
questions.
you can make it 3, 4, and 5. The times.
Okay, I'll try and keep the question short.
Absolutely.
But first, I missed your introductions. at the beginning. You're both atheists. Your scientific background?
Master's.
Okay, I just didn't.
I'm a computer engineer.
Okay, very good. Now, and just so we are on the same page, you would agree that the scientific method, as an atheist, cannot be determined by the scientific method, correct?
You're saying it can't explain itself.
That's right, yeah. Okay. And you would have to go to induction to come up with that. So my question is, from the atheist position, what is your inductive principle that gets you to the method of science?
I think, really, at least in my own experience, it served as the best tool for us to understand the universe in which we live in.
Now, what is the inductive principle, though, that gets you to your scientific method as an atheist? I understand their view as a theist, but I want to know your view as an atheist. How do you get to the inductive method? What is your inductive principle?
You want like a prima facie argument for the scientific method or something? You want
I just want to know what you think that induction is. I can name 3 elements of induction, but from your position, I can't see how any of them hold together. That would be cause and effect, uniformity of nature, and that our perceptions correspond to an external world. But all of those can only be come up with as circular. There's no deductive reason to go in any inductive or any type of looking over evidence would be circular, because you're trying to use induction then to prove induction.
Are you trying to say that the scientific method is that any inference to induct the validity of the scientific method is a tautology?
No, what I'm saying is, and I'm asking you the question, what your inductive principle is, and I'm not getting an answer here, but what would be my position, that your position on inductive is in fact merely an assumption. Your position on the scientific method is an assumption from an atheist point of view. Not necessarily from a theist point of view, because a theist point of view has that built into their cosmology. But the atheist point of view, from any atheist theory of reality, not only do you have a situation where you can't get to knowledge, but the elements of that theory of reality eliminate the possibility of knowledge. So I'm not asking all that. I'm simply asking, what is your inductive principle?
I'm not sure that I disagree with your premises, because you're asking me to form a logical basis to defend the position of the underpinnings of knowledge of the validity of the scientific method.
No, I'm just asking what's your inductive principle. You believe in induction, right?
Yeah, inductive logic, yes.
Yes. What is the principle for that? I'm sorry. I think maybe my time is run out.
You're right.
And I'm not.
You're asking me to put together an inductive construct to validate the scientific method.
Well, no, you should already have an inductive principle. Induction is separate.
I don't have a readily available argument to do that.
Okay. So in other words, you have no reason to believe in the scientific method at this point.
I have lots of reasons to believe in the scientific method.
I'm sorry. There is no reason to believe in it other than circularity.
Again,
repeatability would have to. You have to show that the.
Again, I don't know that I can really. I don't know that I can really follow your premises, or that I can really agree with them. So I'm having a hard time forming a cogent argument based on your premises.
Well, I'm not asking. I'm not giving you premises. My question was simply, what is your inductive principle? Okay,
I think that's another great topic for the next debate.
Well, yeah, scientific method. I'm just asking. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for your question.
Good evening. Thank you. First of all,
doesn't the other side get to respond on that?
Maybe they got a better. Yeah.
We ran out of time.
Yeah, you got an answer for that one? You want to take this
How
one?
do you even come close to that?
You had 45 seconds.
I'm still trying to figure out what the question was.
I did understand the question. I just was confounded.
Sir, to the idea that a certain percentage of deaths are caused by seeking medical help, it would seem that 100% of deaths are caused by God. Is that a fair assumption?
Well, the answer to that question was, first of all, I didn't say it was due to seeking help. I said that
Well, the question
the
is,
third
are
leading
100%
cause.
at best caused by God?
I would say that that's a false assumption.
Okay, then I would say there are hateful Christians and loving Christians, and they both use the Bible to justify their actions. And the question, really a question, I believe the universe exists without cause and is infinite in time and space. It's been here forever, and it goes on forever. Why do you think it more likely, we know the universe is here, and I believe it goes on forever and it's been here forever. Why do you think it more likely that your imagined God is infinite with no cause than the universe is infinite with no cause?
Well, I don't think science is saying
I'm
that.
not asking anything about science. I'm saying why.
You believe, no, but I'm not going to challenge why you believe what you believe, because you're entitled to believe that. But there's science that shows that we live in an expanding universe, which suggests that it's still in the process of evolving. It's growing. There are black holes. There's phenomena that's been observed. You know, to say that it's all things everywhere ever since, that is your belief. So I'm not going to challenge your belief. You're right.
My question is, why do you think it more likely that your imagined God is infinite in time and space than the universe? How did God get here?
God didn't need to get here.
Why does the universe need to get here?
And he's not my imagined God.
Why does the universe
my
need
reference
to
God. Why did what?
Why did the universe need to have gotten here?
You know, I admitted right from the beginning that I have a finite mind. That there are things that I cannot know, that there are things that all of us cannot know. Panelists have admitted that they just don't know. So to deny me of the privilege of saying, you know, some things are beyond my own understanding, I can't answer that. I don't agree with it, but I can't answer why I believe what I believe.
Can I just give a short answer here? I don't have a mic here. Testing. Okay. Yeah, just kind of a short answer. Basically, the second law of thermodynamics, everything is winding down, and so it couldn't be infinitely old. Yet, according to the first law, it couldn't begin itself. So the only possible explanation would be in the beginning God created. You know, if the universe is infinitely old, then all motion would stop and everything would be the same temperature, because that's what the second law says.
But nothing, you're using science to refute.
Yeah, science and the Bible go hand in hand. Science is the Bible.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. Everything's dying.
Question. How can one determine that faith is a reliable way of knowing? I ask because both Christians and Muslims pray, both claim to have their prayers answered. We know that they both can't be right, but that they can both be wrong.
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure that I agree with that statement. I mean, they both can't be right. They're both wrong. Muslims believe in a God, Allah. Muslims came, we believe, from Ishmael.
I'm just saying that.
So there's a connectedness between Judaism and Islam. I believe they're praying to the same God. Now, their conceptualization and description based on what they believe to be sacred writings of Muhammad. There are some differences, but again, a point of order. The topic tonight is there a God? And we've been digressing to the point where we've been talking about a lot of things besides
I asked
all
about
of these.
faith. How can we know that faith is a reliable way of knowing? Because you use faith to know that your God is the one true God, as do Muslims and Hindus. So I just...
Yeah, and to say that my faith is right and theirs is wrong, I don't say that. I say that I explain how I believe what I believe because of faith. That's
right,
the end
as
of
does
this.
the Muslim. And I just want to know, if I was to use faith to know God, how can I determine which faith?
Faith has to have an object. And so what the Christian God, we have the Bible itself, something that no other religion has. And this religion. This is something that was not done in a corner. These things happened in history and time and space. People were there. People saw the miracles of the apostles and prophets. And so that's how we can know these things. So we're putting our faith in a God who has revealed himself to us, to man.
I would say the claims that a Muslim would say to that would be the fact that it's all is well that the Quran is inerrant, that it's been recorded perfectly, and they have faith in that. But considering that the claims in both the Quran and the Bible with respect to the divinity of Jesus are mutually exclusive, I don't think faith is a good way to get it to any answer. I define faith as belief without reason.
Do you have anything to say, Kat?
I mean,
Last question.
Hey, can we have another question from the other side? Because it's been like 6-2.
Yeah.
And
I can't force people to ask questions, sir. If you want to ask a question to the other side, that's fine with me.
Okay. Right now or after?
You'll be our last question.
Okay.
So, Dave, you you made the claim in your initial talk on that there have yet to be any trans-species fossils in the fossil record yet, and that kind of sticks out to me. I just wanted to know, do you have a definition, a testable, objective definition for what you consider separate species?
We would go back to what the Bible calls created kind. There's variation within the kind, but basically we've got a new science now. It's looking at no, I can't even remember the name. It's looking at a created kind, and each one of those kinds only varies so much. We got different kinds of dogs, different kinds of cats, but we don't have a dad or a cog.
Do you have an objective point at which you can observe whether or not that line has been crossed? Because there in science, actual science, there are multiple definitions of species, which it's kind of hit or miss,
species
because
itself
we're talking
is not a biblical
from
term.
a science which which notices that every form of life is in some way related. Now, one previously accepted, objectively observable definition for cross species, or the difference between two species, was that they would not be able to reproduce viable offspring.
Correct, yes, they would produce, but they'd be
sterile.
sterile.
While you're arguing that there's no such thing as trans-species fossils, or there have yet to be discovered something, it just seems like you're coming from a very dishonest standpoint, saying there's no such thing as this thing which I subjectively define for myself. If you could actually objectively test what you're claiming, then, like,
well, they have tested this. We find, for example,
then what's that line? What's that definitive line that says that two things are definitely two separate species?
I don't know that anybody has a specific answer to that.
Because
the
blurred
species
reality
itself,
that we have.
well, we've got subspecies, we've got, but the Bible, the species is not a biblical term, it's created kind.
I get that, but you were making a claim that science has yet to produce evidence for something which you, right now, in your definitions, you cannot test against the claim you're making.
I should have used the word kind instead of species, I guess, but.
Okay, because, I mean, just to point out, you can go today, the studies have shown, like, salamanders in South Africa, they've tested whether or not they can produce viable offspring within a certain range off the coast of South America. Sorry if I said Africa, sorry. But within a certain range along that coast, going all the way around the South American continent, you can be able to find two salamanders which produce viable offspring. But if you go to the other side of the coast from that same chain of salamanders and try to produce viable offspring from different sides of the continent or from too far of a distance along that coast, they don't produce viable offspring.
Yeah. Okay.
And multiple species have shown this. So you can see this trans-species relationship right here, right now.
I would say that those are subspecies.
What does that mean?
Yeah, because subspecies is branching out.
Subspecies can
means they
interbreed.
were once related.
Yeah, there's
That's what
different
we're
varieties of
claiming in
dogs,
science.
different varieties of cats, different varieties of salamanders. Yes, those can interbreed.
Yeah, but then they stop producing viable offspring. They make the first step from where they can't crossbreed anymore and then become two separate species which have the ability to change over time from that. So I'm just saying you see that evidence right now. And I think your definition just is
Yes.
very dishonest on your part.
I don't think it's dishonest. I think maybe not clear.
Or your claim is dishonest.
But I believe that all the dog kinds came from the wolf.
And we have one last
Okay.
question.
You guys don't want to respond?
Nobody gets to respond?
Well, she use all the time. So, Mike, since your side, you basically kind of just pander to science for the most part. You appeal to science, and I've studied a little bit about Greek and pagan philosophers throughout time, many generations in the science of their time, and what you see is the generation disproving the previous generation to the point of absurdity all throughout history. And just to make a couple stupid examples is, science said there was a flat Earth at one time. It was a geocentric universe, and the science of our day today is a lot of it's going to be disproven to the future generation to the point of absurdity. So, don't you think that it's a pretty slippery slope to appeal to science, just the science, when it's ever changing and disproving the previous generation?
I'll start it. Okay. That is the best thing about science, because the position of the person of faith is, this is the truth, it has always been the truth, it is inerrant, it is immutable, it will always be the truth. No matter what observation tells me, I know it's the truth in my heart, it was spoken in an ancient book by an ancient prophet, and it is always true no matter what observation and evidence would tell me otherwise. Whereas science is changeable, and science changes to fit what the observations tell us is true. And that is the greatest thing about science. Science is humble, and science allows for doubt and skepticism and for new discoveries. Science is a quest for knowledge, constantly seeking. Science is a competition for who has the best evidence, the best theory. Science is a constant and devoted search for new and better ideas and new and better ways of understanding the universe. That is the very best thing about science. That is why I love science, and that is why we always have to keep looking and searching. And so your question about our understanding of the universe, and has it changed over the millennia? Absolutely. Do we understand the universe better today than we did 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago? Fundamentally, yes, sir, we do. Are we going to learn things in 100 years? They're going to make us look back and go, what the heck were we thinking? Yes, we will. And that is the best thing about why science is such a better way to view the world than faith is. Because again, it allows us to change the way we understand things. If a better theory comes along that's better established by evidence and observation, we change it. Now, for the big ones, the really big ones, evolution, the germ theory of disease, relativity, quantum theory, quantum dynamics, these are things that have been pretty well established and around for decades, if not centuries. And every subsequent observation has only served to affirm them and further establish them as being some of the best understood things in the history of human understanding of the universe. Are there things that could modify them? Possibly. Are there things that could totally overturn them? It seems pretty unlikely at this point. But it's possible. Things that are like more fringy, like string theory, and things that are not yet as well established by observation, could better things come along that could make us go, string theory, what the heck were they thinking? Absolutely, and that is why science is so cool. You got anything?
Yeah, I would just testify to the ability to science to self-correct itself, that as better data, more data comes in, earlier theories can be falsified. That's one of the important parts about science, that a scientific theory must be falsifiable. And I would say that it also speaks to a quality that science has, that when we were talking about the Newtonian physics, we found at some point those break down. But when you talk about relativity, it both supports the Newtonian physics, but also explains motion at very high speeds.
in time.
Okay.
I have one last question, actually. Dave, I have one last question.
Okay.
I lied. And didn't know I was going to lie, but I lied. I said there was one last question, and that was me. So it's for Dave and Dave. Dave and Dave. This is for both of you. Suppose you were alive 4,000 years ago, and you're fighting the Midianites. You're soldiers. Your leader says, God told me, kill the Midianites. If you were soldiers, would you use all your power to complete that and kill as many Mennonites as you can? That's a yes or no question.
Well, having served in the Navy and the Army and the Air Force, will tell you that as a soldier, I wouldn't question the authority of whoever it was above. I mean,
so that's a yes then. Probably.
Yeah, I would be obedient. I mean, that would be the role that I play. The motivation of whoever's making that decision, whether it's an American, whether it's a German, I mean, it's irrelevant. You asked
So
if I were a soldier, would I?
Soldiers do it, right? But I'm asking you, you probably would if you were a soldier in the Israeli army. You would kill these guys, right? Right? And Dave, would you agree with that pretty much?
If God told me to do something, I'd do it.
Well, these are
least
people
I
telling you you'd have to believe what they said. But my main question is this. Suppose that you had a nuclear weapon back then, hidden in your back pocket that no one knew about. Would you use the nuclear weapon on those Mennonites? You were told to destroy as many Mennonites as you could. Would you use the nuclear weapon on those Mennonites?
Assuming they were mostly atheists.
Well, they might not be atheists, but they were pagans for sure. Would you use a more powerful weapon? And of course, the last question is, you don't have to answer that, Dave.
Hey, we're all going to die sometime anyway.
That's right, but do you think the next nuclear weapon that's going to happen on Earth is not going to be political? It will probably be religious. Do you agree with that? The next nuclear weapon to explode on Earth. It might not be your religion, but do you agree that it would probably be religious?
I wouldn't say I don't think it's going to be religion. It will be ideological, because I believe it could come out of North Korea. Is that, over religion? No, I think it's an ideological difference.
Their ideology is
absolute
God worship.
Do I believe? No. But that's just mine.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
And
Okay, well, we're now going to have a few minutes for closing statements. And David Layman will give the first closing statement. Now, you can either, if you'd like to come up, or you can, either way, or if you would like to sit.
I'll just stand here.
Okay.
So the camera can get a good shot at me. Well, we've talked about a lot of things tonight, and it is a very broad topic, and yet our atheist friends chose it. I think the problem is really understanding the fact that the Bible itself does teach us things that we had no way of knowing. The Bible itself gives us history, especially the Table of Nations, of what happened back then. It's most of what it talks about is history, and the only way to know about a historical event is to talk to somebody who was there. And that's why we have very little history about what happened in the early nations that found, from the Tower of Babylon. So the Bible does give us history, but it also gives us a way of knowing God himself. He reveals himself throughout the scriptures. And so we can find little things to pick at, but sometimes it's difficult because we don't really understand all of the things behind, the reasons behind it. Rebellion is a seed of witchcraft, and iniquity is choosing to decide my decision instead of God's word. God elevates his word higher than his name, and yet we are seeing that we're putting science above God. And whenever we do that, it's not in man to direct his thoughts. We have many times thought logically to the wrong conclusion. I know I have. And so we have to go back to some higher source. God has our best interest at heart. He knows us. He loves us. And he has the atheist's best interest at heart as well. God loves them too. The thing is, he has given us all the knowledge that we need to know him. And yes, there are certain things that we will find out as we study the Bible. We'll look at some of these details. I have several theories as to what happened concerning some of these events. But, for example, we can look at all of the different so-called pre-human fossils. We could look at every single one of them. Australopithecus afarensis was actually mentioned, and I went and visited her. It was Lucy, because they were playing Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds when they found it. Johansson, yeah. But the problem is that, you know, here's where we've got about 4 foot gibbon, which has a 450 cc brain. Humans have a 1500 cc brain. Basically, the phalangeals were not there, but on other Australopithecus afarensis, we find that they're curved so that she can swing from trees. I mean, she wasn't beginning to be people. She was a monkey, and yet she was supposed to be in a direct line of human evolution. We can go right through every single one of these so-called pre-human fossils, and we find that they were either a fully human, like, you know, or they were simply somebody made up, you know, for example, Nebraska man made from the tooth of an extinct pig, you know, which wasn't even extinct because we found him live in a well in Paraguay. And we go back and look at the Piltdown man, which was a total fraud. And so Ramapithecus was built from a handful of teeth and a piece of a jaw. How do they know he walked upright with a handful of teeth? He could have crawled on his belly or walked on all fours for all we know. And we found baboons in Ethiopia with the same kind of teeth as Ramapithecus. And so this, you know, speech is uniquely human. Humans have both a pre-wired brain capable of learning and conveying abstract ideas, physical anatomy, the mouth, throat, and tongue, the larynx to produce a wide range of sounds. The only animals can produce a few animals can produce some approximate sounds, but basically we have all the equipment, and it didn't come there through evolution. It didn't come there through a process. It came there through design. And if you can't see design in the world, in our own human bodies, then you're not looking. Are we through?
No.
Oh, okay. I didn't know how much time. Okay. So basically I look at the inspiration of the Bible. Now, here's a book that was written over 1,500 years and 40 generations, for 40 different authors from every walk of life, at different places of time, in different moods, on different continents, in 3 different languages, on hundreds of controversial subjects, and yet we have complete unity from beginning to end. We don't find that in the Quran. We don't find that in any other book. Only God could orchestrate such a book over 1,500 years with all these different authors. And God did this so we would recognize who he was. He did this in time and space so that we have no excuse to recognize him, to look for him, to call upon him. And he's there. He's closer to us than any of us can imagine. And he's here tonight. And he can hear your prayer. And you ask the question, a fool has said in his heart there is no God. And yet the Bible itself says that even any person that calls upon me, I will answer. I will hear from heaven. And he's a friend of sinners. How far did he have to come down to get to me? Well, he had to come down an awful long ways. Would he come down further to get to somebody else? Watchman Nee in China made this statement to these atheists over there. He said, okay, you can tell God that you don't believe him. All God requires is an honest heart. You can say, Lord, I do not believe you, but help my unbelief. And many people came to know the Lord Jesus Christ through simply asking God, say, Lord, if you're real, I want to know you. And I think God's still answering that kind of prayer today.
Just go straight down.
Well, I guess I should stand. I understood. I like the saying, everything that I tell you is a lie until you find it to be true. And I wish I could explain to you how in my 55 plus years I believe that even though I went through periods where I didn't believe, where I questioned, whether I doubt, whether I looked in totally foreign directions, somehow something miraculously called me to something which every element of my being has confirmed for me in my eyes, in my moments of lucidity and in my moments of craziness. Most of those moments of craziness were remediated with Prozac. So I've had my periods of, depression and doubt and anxiety. But there's something much, much more powerful than all of that. Something which, when I don't even have to try, it just calls me and pulls me to understand that I was created to have a personal relationship with an eternal being. And you know what that's called? That's called my belief. That's what I put my faith in. And my faith is tested. And my faith is proven. Because just when I think that something is beyond my control or something is within my control, something unexplainable happens that keeps bringing me back, keeps pulling me back. I didn't really want to get into the inconsistencies in the Holy Bible because there certainly are plenty of things that we can pick on, and we can try to show how there's a contradiction between this translation and that translation, between this account of the Gospels and this man's account of the Gospel. And all I can tell you is that the only thing that makes sense to me is that when nothing else existed, there was an eternal God who willed it into being, and that I'm a byproduct of that, as I believe we all are, and future generations to come. Do I believe that there's no place for science? I believe there's a great place for science. I think that science and medicine have helped us achieve great things. But those are things that were created by us, who were created in the image of an eternal creator. I'm not asking anybody to buy into what I buy into. It's not what can ever be obtained in any discussion, in any conversation. I'm glad to have shared an evening with a couple of gentlemen who are passionate and convicted and are asking those questions. All that can ever be asked of any of us is that we continue to seek the truth, and that the truth would eventually find us.
So to wrap up, I'd like to hit a couple of high points that I think didn't get mentioned. The history of nations, there's no proof for an ancient Israelite culture in Egypt. There's no proof of the Exodus story. But what's a bigger telling here is so much of the argument was on what we don't know. So, suppose that we were able to create life in a laboratory. We were able to do it under conditions similar to that of the Earth when it was very young. At what point do we have to drop this argument, and what happens next? Are the goalposts moved? The problem with arguments that are based on our lack of knowledge, our arguments from ignorance, is as we learn more, the arguments fall away. And I think this is a very poor reason to believe in something because of the unknown. I would also like to, on a reconciliation note, is when you talk about equations of motion, statics, dynamics, I felt the exact same thing in MAE 102 about Isaac Newton. But to get on of the bigger question of why am I here tonight, and I'd like to read you a quote that took me from the armchair atheist to the active atheist. And it's from Christopher Hitchens in his excellent book, God is Not Great. Religion looks forward to the destruction of the world, perhaps half aware that its unsupported arguments are not entirely persuasive, and perhaps uneasy about its own greedy optimization of temporal power and wealth. Religion has never ceased to proclaim the apocalypse and the day of judgment. I need no reason to remind you of the danger of the self-fulfilling prophecy, especially when the former president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, I apologize, Arabic and is not my first language, is a fervent believer in the imminent reappearance of the 12th Imam, the Shia version of the Messiah. This is terrifying because this is a rogue state which is seeking to acquire nuclear weapons. And before I turn the floor over to Kent to close it out, I would ask of you two things. what type of evidence do you need to believe something is true? And do you apply the same burden of proof to all theistic claims, or do you make special exceptions for your own belief system? Thank you.
I just want to start off by thanking everyone for attending, especially the folks on the other side of the room. I think this is a little bit of a hostile room, and I want to thank the folks who came up from that side to ask questions, because I think it helped move the debate forward. And I want to thank our distinguished opponents, Mr. Layman, Mr. Penrose. We had a little bit of fun here tonight, and really appreciate your attendance, and I think this was a great discussion. I had a lot of fun, hope everybody else did, and the moderator and the timekeeper especially. She had a very difficult job. So, we started off tonight talking about does God exist? And my position sort of leading into this was to say, I can't say that God doesn't exist. I can't prove that God doesn't exist, and science cannot prove that God doesn't exist. I don't think science ever probably will be able to prove that God doesn't exist, because science has a really hard time proving a negative. But what I think science can conclusively establish is that we do live in a universe that requires no God to explain its existence. It doesn't require a God to explain how it got here, how we got here, how everything got here, how life got here, etc., etc., etc. So I briefly touched on the difference between faith and science and reason. Faith is the position that says, I have all the answers already, and I don't need to be concerned with evidence. Whereas science is humble, and science says these are the best answers or theories that we have which fit the evidence currently available, but we are always ready to adjust our views of reality if better evidence comes along which establishes a new theory. And the cool thing about that is that, to me, that's a much more humble way of viewing the universe. It's a much more awe-inspiring and beautiful way of seeing the universe and one's place in the universe, instead of saying, I have this divinely inspired view of the universe, to say that I see the universe with the lens of reality and I see the universe as established by observation, is a much more humble way of viewing the universe. Science is constantly looking to adjust its view of reality, where faith deals in absolutes, absolute truth, absolute morality, God's absolute existence. Faith is always looking to adjust its view based on what can be observed. Our modern morality is the result of evolution, and our modern morality, ladies and gentlemen, is vastly superior than the morality of the Bible. I'm willing to bet that no one here tonight would be willing to commit genocide on the order of their God. I'm hoping not. I'm hoping not. I'm hoping not. I'm hoping that if on the orders of their God, you were ordered to go out and slaughter the Amalekites, you would say, no, you're not God. The God of love would not order me to do such a thing. You must be a devil and go away. That's my hope, at least. I'm willing to bet that if any one of us here tonight, persons of faith or not, were to come upon a man with his son upon an altar, with a knife up against his throat, ready to sacrifice him, and that man were to tell you, oh, I'm under the orders of God to sacrifice my son, I'm willing to bet everyone here tonight would say, or think to themselves, this is a person who is mentally ill, and I'm going to intervene and call the authorities. And the reason we would do that is because our modern morality is vastly superior to any morality that's in that old book. Again, our modern morality that has evolved over time is vastly superior than the morality of that Bronze Age book that it's vastly superior to anything that can be found in there. So again, personal experience. We've had many appeals to personal experience here tonight. About what the power of prayer, observation. I had a feeling come over me. I know this to be true because this is my personal experience. The problem with personal experience is that it can be very easily fooled. There are chemicals in the brain that can create experiences of transcendence and wonder, that can make people see gods and spirits and angels and all kinds of things. There's a chemical called DMT that's in the brain. You may have read about it. Apparently it's amazing. I really want to try it. But under the influence of DMT, which is a naturally occurring substance in the brain, one can have all kinds of amazing transcendent experiences. Ladies and gentlemen, that is responsible for the feeling that you get when you get on your knees and meditate and you see all kinds of wonderful things. There's a lovely thing that's in Canada that I also want to try, and it's called the God helmet. And what it does is it sits on the temporal lobes of your brain, and it sends a certain electromagnetic wave into the temporal lobes of your brain. And when people put this helmet on, they report having the same types of experiences that monks have when they meditate, out-of-body experiences, experiences of feeling a presence in the room, transcendent experiences. And what this tells us conclusively is that when people have experiences of seeing gods or experiencing other beings coming into their lives, it's not because gods are real, it's because their brains are giving us these experiences. And we can replicate those experiences in a laboratory setting. So we know that the brain is absolutely capable of creating those things for us. Scientifically, we've established this. So personal experience can't dictate reality. We can replicate those things in a laboratory. The scientific method, logic, and rationality are the only way to establish a basis for reality. To escape the logical fallacies that we're all prone to get out of our own brains and understand the true nature of reality. We talked about peace. The God-shaped hole. I love this argument, the God-shaped hole, that if we don't have God in our lives, we won't have peace. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the God-shaped hole, and somehow, miraculously, well, it's not a miracle, but I still have peace, ladies and gentlemen. I sit here tonight as an atheist with apparently a God-shaped hole that only God can fill. If I were told right now that I have 10 minutes to live, I would have absolute peace. And you know why? Because I am sitting here tonight, and I am made of star stuff. The elements that are in my body were forged in the stars of exploding supernova that traveled across vast distances of interstellar space and got here and made up me. And 98%, ladies and gentlemen, of the atoms that make up your body and my body are replaced once a year, 98%. You know what that means? Our atoms are constantly coming in and flowing out into each other and into the matter all around us. Life is miraculous on its own. The stars are amazing. There are more galaxies in this universe than there are grains of sand on all the beaches of this planet. Think about that. I don't need God to feel awe or wonder. I don't need supernatural things to explain the origin of the universe. I don't need any of that to feel amazing every single day. I don't have a God-shaped hole. I have an awe-shaped hole, and it's filled every day by my understanding of the awesome things in this universe that are explainable and understandable through science. My quest is for knowledge and to understand the true nature of the universe. I don't need to say, insert God here or insert miracle here. I understand how the universe actually works pretty well. I try to understand a little more every day. And that's all I'm asking you to do. Take another look at it. Free your mind. Release yourself from the dictator of the heavens. It's a much better world without him. Thank you very much.
All right, so I would like to thank David Layman, David Penrose, Chris Clarke, and Kent Martin for their presentations and discussion. Let's give them one more hand. Always has something to say.
Wow. Dave. That sounds great, doesn't it? Kent, Chris, this was great. Did everybody enjoy it?
Yes.
Did everybody enjoy it? It's almost 3 hours and no one has left. So that's a good thing. But now you can leave, but you don't need to go home. We're going to have discussion right outside, and for those who would like to take in a beverage or maybe an appetizer, we're going to go over to the post. We'll email you if you're on the email list for the next one. It's the Christian side to decide on what topic. I'm really excited to hear about what topic Dave is going to come up with. You have an idea, Dave?
You haven't talked to me.
Yeah, we're going to have... Oh, sorry, number 3.
3? Okay.
Yeah, I've been talking to some of the girls, and I thought maybe we could have 2 girls against 2 girls sometime. Maybe not next time.
I got to have some time on that one.
Yeah, okay.
I can make it work. Anybody
I noticed over in my office you asked how many want to debate, and I saw that several of them raise their hands. So
I'll put out an email. I will do that.
Now, it may not be this next time, but sometime.
Yes, sometime in the future. I really appreciate that. We are outnumbered on the atheist side mostly by males. There is an evolutionary reason for that, though. If you'd like to ask me, I'll be outside. Thank you all. Update.
One more thing. Hold it. Keep those up. Go ahead.
Okay, before you leave, as a clipboard I'd like to pass around. If If you'd like to know about future debates or our meetings with Christian
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good job. Thanks, Damien. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming out.